Holy shit, they actually did it. So FromSoft just released patch 1.06 for Elden Ring, which makes some huge changes both in the way certain weapons are balanced as well as adding new functions that will massively influence the way PvP functions in this game. So I thought let's go over the changes together here and discuss what they actually mean. And first off, let's start at the top with the additional elements they added, which is a function to send summoning signs to summoning pools in multiple areas, including distant areas. This is something that will probably make most co-opers very happy, since now it is actually possible to leave your summon sign anywhere in the world and be able to different boss fights, for example, all over the map. Which is a change a lot of players have asked for and one that is very good for connectivity, especially going forward. The function that I personally enjoyed reading about, however, is actually the function to invade a larger area, including distant areas. So same principle, but now as an invader it is actually possible to invade people all over the map as long as they are still in your level range, and it seems like it doesn't matter whether or not you have already visited that area in your own world. This for me really is the biggest change in this patch, since it will greatly decrease the amount of time you have to wait for invasions, as well as greatly increasing the variance that you have with your invasions, since now you will be able to invade many different areas all at once. I'm really happy FromSoft actually heard the complaints that players were having with Elden Ring PvP, since the player base was already decreasing drastically, and hopefully now at least some people who might have already turned away from it might come back. On a side note, they also now included an option to complete White Mask Varys questline to obtain the Bloody Finger item that you need for invasions, not by doing multiplayer invasions but by defeating a new NPC, which I guess is great for players that for one reason or another had no chance to do the multiplayer invasions beforehand. In terms of balance changes, the weapon classes that have gotten the greatest upgrades were the Greatsword, Curved Greatsword and Great Hammer weapon classes. However, before we talk about all the changes they did to those weapons, we first have to talk about the elephants in the room. So first off, let's start a little smaller with the Ashes of War Glintstone Pebble and Glintstone Dart, which have decreased damage and stagger power on their projectile now. This hopefully means that the projectile part of the Ash of War will no longer be able to directly combo into the follow-up attack, which enabled you to do some incredible damage on your opponent to the point that it was very clearly overpowered. I really like the way they went about this change, because it seems like these Ashes of War will still be usable, but will just have their power decreased enough to actually no longer be overpowered. The much more interesting change, however, has been done to the Ash of War Bloodhound Step, which now has decreased travel distance and invincibility frames. Thank God. Bloodhound Step was very clearly a problem before, giving players a much too easy way to avoid damage, and hopefully now this is actually no longer a problem. They also seem to have reduced the performance of Bloodhound Step when used continuously, while increasing the travel distance when on light equip load. And in conjunction with that, they actually buffed the Ash of War Quickstep with a shortened activation interval when using it, while also increasing the ability to circle around the enemies when locked on. Also, they added the same changes as to Bloodhound Step when it comes to using it continuously, as well as the travel distance when on light equip load. Again, I think these changes have been implemented pretty smartly, hopefully leaving both Ashes of War usable while not be overpowered, and actually making them distinct enough from one another to make both usable instead of Quicksteps just being the worst version of Bloodhound Step. The next big one is the decreased damage and bleed buildup of the weapon skill Corpse Piler, which is famously the weapon skill that Rivers of Blood has when hit with the blood attack, while only decreasing the damage slightly when hit with the blade. So once again, Rivers of Blood was very clearly overpowered, a lot of players complained about it, and now it seems like it might actually still be usable, but not as overpowered anymore, which is at least my hope, since I think the weapon itself is actually really cool. It just was no fun any longer when you could basically one-shot any player who got caught in the combo, and hopefully that's done with. And the last of the really big balance changes in my eyes is the decreased target tracking ability of the sorcery Stars of Ruin. Stars of Ruin obviously was very easily spammable and gave your opponent very little outs other than just running away and keeping at a very large distance to you, which basically made it impossible for them to attack you. So having the target tracking ability of Stars of Ruin decreased is probably a pretty good way to still keep the spell viable while not being as overpowered anymore. All in all, it seems like FromSoft actually addressed a large portion of the biggest problems that people had with the balancing of certain weapons and spells in Elden Ring PvP, so hopefully the perspective on Elden Ring's PvP can finally change a little and people can actually come back to playing and enjoying the game. When it comes to the changes they made to the weapon classes of Greatsword, Curved Greatsword and Great Hammers, it now has reduced time it takes for rolling to become possible after an attack. It also has increased motion speed of strong attacks and charged attacks. It has increased guard counter motion speed, and also the attack speed of the Great Axes weapon classes has increased in general, and it now has reduced time it takes for rolling to become possible after an attack. Again, I really like the change to these weapon classes, since they were a little underpowered before, especially in PvP, as you can hear me talk about in part 3 of our Elden Ring PvP guide series, but it might just be that that is actually now outdated that we have these changes. And lastly, they increased the rolling distance when player has a light equip load, which again is actually a really smart move, because now having a light equip load might actually be something that you want to go for, whereas before you were pretty much always better off with a medium roll and the higher damage absorption that a heavier armor would give you. Looking at the bug fixes, we are not going to go over all of them, however there are a couple that I want to point out. Like these two right here, where they fixed the bug which caused the player to become more easily noticed by enemies when wearing deathbed dress, even when crouching, as well as the bug which caused charge attacks with flails to damage ally characters when wearing the deathbed dress. Actually, I am kinda sad about those two, because they were really funny and also kinda easily avoidable by just not wearing the deathbed dress. But I guess it was a bug and it's good that it's gone. A more important bug fix, especially for PvP, is the now fixed bug that caused HP to regenerate when switching your equipment to a certain type of armor. The certain type of armor that they're talking about here is obviously the glintstone crown that you could take on and off to infinitely regenerate HP, which basically ruined any kind of balance that Elden Ring's PvP still had. So I'm very glad to see that's gone. And right here we see that they finally fixed the bug which prevented the player from jumping mid-air while riding under specific conditions. And obviously that relates to riding torrent while having a greatsword or a weapon with a similar animation for carrying your weapon on you, because any weapon that you carried over your shoulder would basically make it so that you couldn't do the double jump with torrent in midair. So that is now fixed, which is something that we all can now appreciate during our future playthroughs. Another big one is the fixed bug which allowed users to reach certain inaccessible areas during multiplayer, which is hopefully making it so that we now no longer have AFK farmers in PvP, or at least a lot less. And I guess that's something that we can all be happy about, apart from maybe the AFK farmers themselves. The last bug I want to point out is this one here. Fixed a bug in some maps that allowed users to reach unexpected locations using certain procedures. So this obviously targets the way that you could use the Ash of War on the Hand of Melania to keep you in midair, thereby jumping to out of bounds areas in certain locations like Lindel, for example. For most of us just playing through the game normally, that probably never has been a big deal, but it is kinda sad for all the boundary breakers out there who kinda found cool and interesting stuff out of bounds by using this method. On the other hand, it is probably a bug that could lead to some awkward situations by doing it by accident, so overall not a bad change. You can obviously go over the rest of the bug fixes either on Bandai Namco's website or on the Steam page yourself, but I think those are really the big ones, especially when it comes to PvP. FromSoft really seems to have done a good job addressing the most important issues with PvP right now, while of course still not having addressed everything that anyone was crying out for. For example, poise is still unchanged, and I guess that some people will be unhappy about that, but overall I think we have just gotten a fantastic new update that will greatly increase the quality in PvP, especially with the new function of now being able to be summoned and invade in multiple areas and not just the immediate location that you're at. I will probably do another video in a couple of days talking more in depth about how these changes actually affected the PvP, but for now, thanks a lot for listening, have a wonderful day and hear you very soon!